It's the honor and pleasure is all mine, I have to say. I was so happy to connect with you and your research in the last few months. And I'm very excited to give this lecture with you, and I look forward to discussing it with you and to your feedback. And I'm also happy to tell you more about the project and during question time, and yeah, to get to know you and your research as well. So I propose I just start sharing screen now, and we just jump into it. And of course, you know, feel free to interrupt me if there's like something. I'll try to, it's kind of a heavy lecture, so it's long, and it's also a little bit depressing. So you have to kind of hold through it a little bit in some places. Yeah, I hope you'll find it interesting. Okay, so I'm sharing my Microsoft PowerPoint. Okay. Right. And I also have to apologize because I also haven't used WebEx before, so hopefully it's, you know, for users who are not very technically savvy. Okay, so my title is How Intensifying Meat Production is Facilitating the End of Meat. So I'm stating something that is actually my thesis in this paper. And so my main claim is that, ironically, the intensification of the meat industry, and by that I mean that its industrialization, so-called factory farms, are facilitating the end of meat, or at least of what we so far have known as meat. My inspiration here are products such as this culinary fascination of mine last year, products like Beyond Sausage. And these plant-based sausages are very interestingly marketed by their developers and producers. And we see here how Beyond Meat are sort of situating themselves in this market. They say, Beyond Meat, we started with simple questions. Why do you need an animal to make meat? Why can't you build meat directly from plants? Okay, this is a interruption. Let me see. Somebody maybe take Pablo. He's actually going to come into this presentation at some point, but yeah. Okay, so why do you need an animal to create meat? Why can't you build meat directly from plants? That is our company's mission. We hope our plant-based meats allow you and your family to eat more, not less, of the traditional dishes you love. Together, we can truly bring exciting change to the plate and beyond. Now, what fascinated me here was that everyday ideas like meat. So my first kind of interest or fascination with this was in thinking about meat as found science here, as meat found and founded in vegan biotech. But I'd like to instead start this story one step earlier. So before we think of how meat gets found and founded in biotech and vegan biotech, the question I want to pose here is, how do current practices of meat production make space or leave room for us to think of meat as animal-free? So in some ways, how does meat get loose, you know, or lost from the animal? And here I'm going to offer a three-part argument. So first, I'm going to argue that industrial meat production relies on what I call technologies of effacement. These technologies are technologies that block face-to-face encounters between animals and people as morally significant others. And here I'm using some of the work of Emmanuel Levinas, of which I'll say more soon. So first part of the argument, intensification relies on these technologies of effacement. blocking face-to-face encounters. Second part, this effacement can generate and also amplify what I call original ignorance, which is an ignorance of the original or the source of something, contrasted with an often familiar, intimate knowledge of its derivatives. So in this case, for example, loving bacon, but having never met a pig. So these technologies of effacement, blocking human-animal encounters, are feeding into this amplifying original ignorance. And here comes the twist. So here I'm following the work of feminist social theory, in this case, Lindsay McGoey. And McGoey argues that ignorance can be emancipatory. So ambiguity and ignorance can challenge categories or classifications that have been already imposed. So that's my argument in a nutshell. So first, I'm saying intensification is part of, it includes effacement, and this effacement amplifies an original ignorance and ambiguity of meat, which challenges its predefined animal origin. Sorry, here there should be effacement somewhere in that sentence. Okay, but I think you got it, right? I can't see you, but yes, I assume that was clear. So this is my outline. First, saying something about technological intensification and effacement. And as you see by the looks of this, this is where most of my time is going to go. Then I'm going to talk about effacement and original ignorance and segue into ignorance and emancipation. Okay. So here is a photo from the first time I ever met a cow. Now, this was in the summer of 2020, and it was in Inderøy. It's quite a rural part of Norway, middle of Norway. It was a beautiful sunny day, and we were at the farm of one of our partners in the mitigation project, Snerting Ranch is called. And we were there, our researchers, some of my colleagues had brought their kids. I had my dog, who you heard just now, Pavlo, and I had this, for the first time in my life, I saw a cow feeding its cows, and several of the cows were in the shade and taking some rest from the sun. You know, in Norway in the summer when it's sunny, it's really sunny because the sun doesn't set until, you know, 11 midnight, or doesn't actually even set properly. So these cows, most of them were in the shade with their calves, except from one. And she saw my dog, and she certainly seemed to be a kind of alpha cow. She came to check out Pavlo, and Pavlo like made himself really, really small and like covered in the grass and like tried to become invisible. And I felt I had to step in, you know, between her and the dog. And I remember putting my hand on her forehead, and I kind of, you know, sorry, that must be somebody's not being muted. Okay, putting my hand there and saying, okay, you know, this is stop somehow. And my heart was racing, and I could really feel that this animal, if she wanted to, she could have really pushed me over. So I was very relieved when she approved of our existence, me and Pablo, and she just let us be. And of course, this is quite remarkable in a sense, because this was the first time I ever encountered a cow, even though I grew up, you know, I grew up in Athens, and I was eating, I remember we were living in Polkatikia, and going down to the pizza place and having, you know, pizza with just ham and cheese or everything on it, almost every day. I've been a meat eater for a long time until, you know, for various reasons, I changed some of my practices. I can tell you more about that also in questions if you want. But But yeah, so what can explain this kind of phenomenon, right? The fact of the matter is that the separation between humans and the animals they consumed has been systematically and quite in a quite sophisticated way produced in the last maybe now almost 50 years. So a key source for me here is Noélie Viag's ethnography of French slaughterhouses in the region of Andour in France. And she documents how slaughterhouses became more and more bigger and bigger and further removed from the towns, and documents this phase in the change in the 80s of towards industrialized slaughtering. Okay, but before we go into that, I want to take us to a next stage in this argument, which is considering encounters as morally significant to begin with, right? Before I kind of talk about why technology then intervening in these encounters is making a difference in the ethics of animal production, animal meat production, animal-based meat production. So I'm here inspired by the work of Emmanuel Levinas. He's a French-speaking and writing philosopher of Jewish Lithuanian origin. His own story is quite interesting here. He was captured as a prisoner of war during the Second World War and sent to Germany in a labor camp, which in a way was lucky because he was not sent to a concentration camp. And he has an essay where he describes how these so-called free Germans were looking upon him and his fellow prisoners as what he calls a gang of apes, or less than human. And here I want to say Levinas his philosophy is actually quite human-centric, of which I will say more later. But he contrasts the behavior of the German soldiers who were guarding them, and also actually the German citizens who they were encountering in their work, in their forced labor, with the behavior of a dog that they lovingly called Bobby. The prisoners called Bobby. So Bobby would greet the prisoners every morning in the morning assembly, and also greet them when they came back from the labor camp. And so in some ways, Bobby was more able to encounter or to meet these humans as morally significant others than the Germans. So for Levinas, Levinas is also quite unique or important in philosophy because his approach to ethics is a phenomenological one. So contrasting, I imagine some of you would know about normative ethics frameworks such as utilitarianism or deontological approaches to ethics or virtue ethics. So normative ethics approaches this question of, what is the good? What is good? What's a good way to act? In a principled manner, trying to derive some sort of general principles or advice about how to do good in any situation, right? So for example, quite very, now I'm simplifying, of course, but well-known utilitarian motto is this: what's the good? Oh, what should I do, right? You have to do the greater good for the greater number. That's the right thing to do. What produces the greatest good for the greater number? Or in deontological reasoning, one might resort to rules or principles or articulations of moral duties as guiding one's behavior in specific situations. Now, for Levinas, ethics is not about such frameworks, but ethics describes an experience. And for Levinas, ethics is the experience of encountering what he calls encountering the other through their face. And these are both important terms that I turn to now in turn. So for Levinas, ethics is not premised on similarity. So for example, I don't look at Stathis, I say, oh, you know, okay, he has two eyes, he seems to be able to talk, and arms, and looks a bit like me. So, okay, he must be somebody I have to consider as important to me. Or rather, for Levinas, we are bound morally to each other because we are radically different. So this radical alternative, and radical here means like deep rooted alterity that we hold for each other. He calls this inner being, or the secrecy that we have for each other. And also Levinas was religious, so one might think of this inner secrecy or this the inner being as something like the soul, right? But we don't have to go to the metaphysical realm to understand what he's talking about as a kind of uniqueness of each being. And for him, it's this uniqueness that bounds us to each other morally. In which way? So he says, the strangeness of the other, his irreducibility to the I, to my thoughts and my possessions, is precisely accomplished as a calling into question of my spontaneity, as ethics. So to approximate it, you know, and now I'm jumping to another species as well, which Levinas wouldn't do. But, you know, when I encountered the cow, right? So the idea is that my spontaneity, what I might do in that situation is called into question because I am meeting somebody right there, a strange other, whose being, right, is irreducible to me, to my thoughts, my possession. This other is in a way out of my control, perhaps practically also in this case, since I really didn't have any control over this cow. But for Levinas, this is a kind of also deeper sense of strangeness here, right? It is hooked onto that secrecy and that inner being of the other. So this calling into question of our spontaneity, what in other places he talks of as pausing in the face of this other, Levinas calls ethics. Okay, so far so good. For Levinas, it's this experience of meeting this strange other and pausing, or your spontaneity is paused. And how does this happen? Now, for Levinas, his key concept here is that of the face. So what is the face? The face is defined as follows: the way in which the other presents himself, exceeding the idea of the other in me, we here name face. This mode does not consist in figuring as a theme under my gaze, in spreading itself forth as a set of qualities, forming an image. The face of the other at each moment destroys and overflows the plastic image it leaves me, the idea existing to my own measure and to the measure of its ideatum, the adequate idea. Oh my God, this sounds, and as I'm reading it to you, it sounds really French. Anyway, I'll keep going. It does not manifest itself by these qualities, but καθ' αυτό, in person per se. It expresses itself. Okay. Now, it's not only French, it's so often when we translate French into English, it sounds even more opaque in my view. But so the face for Levinas is, one might think, okay, the head face, right? It's like a thing. No, for him, the face is a way, a mode in which the other or any one of us can present themselves. And this way in which we present ourselves that exceed the idea that somebody might have of us is what Levinas wants to call face. So this face, even though it leaves a plastic image, even though one can sense it, one can see one being like, grumpy or like astonished. Even though there is a kind of plastic image, the face itself at each moment is destroying and overflowing that plastic image. It's going beyond it. And so the face is not manifesting itself as, or in terms of these sensible qualities, but in itself, according to Levinas. Now, another way, at least I use to understand the notion, the concept of the face in Levinas, is by contrasting it to the concept of the front in social theorist Erving Goffman. So Goffman has written a seminal book on the presentation of self in everyday life. Personal front of an performer and also their professional front. So for example, he contrasts the professional front of doctors versus nurses, and doctors being perhaps, with a different also now I'm thinking also of habitus is a connected concept here, but both the front and habitus can be contrasted to the face. So the face is what would go beyond the front, or what would break the front, and what would be hooked on the uniqueness of each of us as beings with this inner life, as opposed to, for example, I don't know, academics or doctors or nurses. Okay, so I hope I've kind of made this concept a little bit clearer for you. And as I said, Levinas was not writing about animals primarily, even though he does himself reflect on the possibility of facing animals, including in the essay that I mentioned, where he discusses Bobby and his German guards. So, but he does emphasize the importance of the eyes and of the body in expressing as the face. So he says that the eyes break through the mask, the language of the eyes impossible to dissemble. The eye does not shine, it speaks. And similarly, the whole body, a hand or a curve of the shoulder can express as a face, like, this kind of, body image like that, or this, right? Now you can't see me so well, this visual, but and yes, animals have eyes and they have bodies, even if they don't speak the same way. So the animal face then can be defined by extension as a mode through which an animal exudes their inner being or secrecy. So the face can be expressed through the body, eyes, movement, or other sensescapes, but it is not reducible to these. Further, the face is not sufficient for facing. It might be that we are met with humans, right, who would presumably have a face. And yet, as we see in the example of Levinas and his Nazi guards, these guards need not actually recognize or encounter Levinas, pose their spontaneity, and see him or encounter him in this mode of ethics. And contrastingly, a dog seemed to have done so. So this was a question I asked in the context of Levinas, and I was very happy that it was a kind of, it was not a kind of, it was an original contribution to this debate. So my question was, what conditions facing, or reversely, effacing the other? So moving from the concept of the face to the action of facing. That's something I flagged, and also then, going to, as an STS trained scholar, going to what conditions these moments. So what I'm arguing, and I wrote first about animal experimentation. So I defined these technologies in the context of laboratory experiments with animals. and ethnographic work that I had done in this context. So I define technologies of effacement as techniques, tools, or procedures that are often developed with manifest aims such as, expediency, safety, hygiene, or even care, but which operate to block a direct encounter with an expression of the other through their face. And I'll give you some examples of that. So once it comes to meat production, I argue that we find at least 5 types of technology of effacement that range from built environments and architecture. And I'll talk about the buildings of concentrated animal feeding operations and also crates. I won't say too much about enclosures, special enclosures. Second, entry and exit procedures into these spaces can act as technologies of effacement. Here, I'll focus on the distinction between clean and dirty sectors in slaughterhouses. Then also special garments and personal protective equipment can also operate as technologies of effacement. I'll focus on slaughterhouse whites. And fourth and fifth, animal handling protocols and naming and identification techniques. I'll talk about stunning and give you an example of the EC's traces system. Okay, check my time a little bit because, yeah. So this was theoretically the most heavy part, so it took some time, and I hope it's not too tiring now for you, but now we're gonna go into these examples of technologies of effacement, of what I'm calling, or what I'm arguing operate as technologies of effacement. Now this is an example or an image of a concentrated animal feeding operation building. It's in North Carolina. It's a mega hog farm. And you see here, the animals are not visible. They are inside these enclosures. What we see are the waste lagoons around the facility, and actually was an image from a website advertising for better ways of constructing these facilities so they don't overflood. There was accident with flooding that this company responded to. It was an article about that. Now, mega hog farms, I'm using Don Coppin's work here, in the USA, began already in the 50s with the institution of so-called finishing facilities. Cargill, now I think one of the largest producers of meat and processors of meat, started off as owning finishing facilities. Here I'm thinking like finishing school, like going to Swiss finishing school where ladies learn table manners. Here it's animals who get finished properly to be at the table as food. So it's this facilities where animals were held inside so they would get fattened before slaughter. In the 70s, and still initially they had access to the outside and they were not confined, completely confined, but in the 70s and the 80s, technology was developed that allowed for total confinement. So air ventilation, waste management, and automatic feeding of and medication of the animals. So another interesting aspect of the development of these technologies is that they co-evolve with breeding practices and also consumer preferences. So it's interesting to know that pigs initially had 1.5 inches of back fat, which would have kept them warm outside in winters. But because of consumer preferences for leaner meat, to go back fat, which made it harder for them to be kept outside without protection. So, yes. How and why are such buildings a technology of effacement? They, in a very literal sense, block people from getting into and encountering these farms if they are not part of the animal feeding operation. And also within the animal feeding operation, human-animal encounters become rare because the proportions of animals to humans change dramatically. So there are much fewer humans on site, and the occasions for meeting, like feeding or checking on the animals, get automated through monitoring technologies or automatic feeding processes. Specific technology that's quite common, especially in pig farming and in the US, are so-called confinement crates. Here we see a farrowing crate, and there are two types of crates for pregnant and then breastfeeding or pigs, sows. So the gestation crate, the so-called gestation crate, is where the pregnant sow will be kept for the 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days of her pregnancy. And these are crates where the animal can kind of move back and forth slightly, but they cannot turn around, and they can't properly lie down either. And farrowing crates are slightly wider, so the animal can lie down on one of her sides, the sow can lie down, so she can, so her piglets have access to her teats, but she cannot again move around. This is important also because her body is quite heavy and the piglet is quite tiny. So manifestly, these technologies provide the sow with individual attention. They provide her the possibility of feeding without any competition from the rest of the herd, because food is dispensed to each sow, individually. And the gestation crate, holds the womb in place. It's you're less likely to have a miscarriage. The farrowing crate, again, provides for this individualized attention and prevents the body of the sow from squishing and killing her own piglets. Why is this technology, again, operating as one of effacement? I would say that it's, despite these manifest aims of this technology, its operative function is to secure the sow's body as a kind of womb, right? And piglet grower or milk dispenser. So it keeps the womb in place, makes the teats available in cases where the sow is strapped to the floor continuously. And at the same time, it blocks the body and the face of the sow from full expression, and also from encountering other sows in the herd. Of course, effacement is never total. So I guess I shouldn't say of course here, but yes, effacement is never total. One can still see a sow expressing her individuality or her specific needs. You might see a sow trying to bite the bars of her crate, for example. You have probably seen some of these videos from such farms. Now, another example of a technology of effacement are rules for how to enter and exit these spaces. There's a strict separation, and here I'm using VI's ethnography and of slaughterhouses. There's a clear distinction between the clean entrance and the so-called clean entrance and the dirty entrance of the slaughterhouse. And the clean entrance is called the front, and it's where vans will come and load meat from the slaughterhouse. And the back, or the dirty entrance, is where animals are offloaded, and where the vans, again, renderers vans, are going to come and collect waste products from the process. The manifest aim of this distinction is, of course, hygiene. The idea being that an animal that comes from the farm and might be a dirty animal is separated from the meat that one is going to collect and put at their table and their plate. However, the operative function of this distinction is multi-part. On the first count, this separation between sectors blocks people working there from meeting the same animal alive and as meat. Further, so in this sense, they can block workers from facing killing. Secondly, it performs, or sorry, yeah, thirdly, it actually performs this literal cut between the animal and their meat, and also a symbolic distinction between the animal and the meat. So in some ways, you know, when you call the front of the building the place where the meat is encountered, so this assumes of the gaze of somebody who's coming there, meeting the meat first and never greeting the animal, this kind of dirty past. And it's very interesting because, of course, temporally, what happens first, right, the front or the start of this process is the dirty animal. So, so it's interesting, of course, operation of language here. Now, a third type of technology that I think works as technology of effacement are special garments. So in this case, uniforms, the standard whites of the that people wear in slaughterhouses, that consist of a white cap, a white uniform, and apron, and often rubber boots, white rubber boots. And uniforms and personal protective equipment can operate as technologies of effacement, providing what Goffman might call the professional front, or being part of one's professional front. When you, here I'm thinking also of the lab, my own experience going into the animal lab, there's this phase where you take off, you know, your cute like shirt or your jewelry or things that you personally have chosen, or that you might have some sort of emotional connection to, and put on the uniform of the institution that often also doesn't fit this more standardized equipment. And also a lot of this equipment will actually functionally hide parts of the face, might hide the hair, or muffle a little bit the ears, like the sound or the voice. It would hide part of your body, gloves shielding your hands, creating this kind of new surface with which you're met with the animal body. I distinctly remember the paw of a rat touching my hand, and how, you know, I was surprised at how warm it was, and the nails. So all of this equipment, you know, it operates to block or filter some of these encounters, but I would say it's also not total. White also as a color is a very interesting, symbolically color, is this promise of hygiene, of innocence, or also a negation of blood. Hygiene-wise, white is ironically quite resistant to dirt because it can't be bleached. And it has a signification or a connotation of innocence, or perhaps even absolution of, for example, the doctor. And high clergy or brides are often, in several cultures, wear white, or expected to wear white. And white as a negation of blood is also commented in VI. So she says the color of blood has everywhere been ousted by white. White walls, white accessories, white clothing from head to foot. So creating this kind of block between the bleeding animal and the people working with it. Now, when we come to stunning, or as a handling protocol, I want to focus on it because it's one of these guaranteed encounters between a human and an animal. Even in intensified slaughtering, one human is going to stun one animal at some point. So in French, what we call in English the stunning pen is actually called a piège, which means a trap. So I will go with this name here, the trap. And the trap is placed along the race. Race is where the animals are guided through. It's a corridor often designed, you know, in a certain way, so as not to scare the animals, but to guide them towards the point of stunning and afterwards bleeding and yes, later stages of processing. So the trap tricks the animal to fall in it. So as the animal is walking, there's a part where it becomes more constrained and the animal becomes immobilized, so that the human might have a better, more stable target. So the manifest aim of this technology is, of course, the safety of actually, ironically, people also talk about the safety of the animal itself, because before this technology was in place, for example, in the case of large bovines, people would have to have rope around the horns, and at least 3 people had to be in place to immobilize the animal, and others to stun it or drive a bolt through its head. And at that stage, the animal would fight, and people and the animal might get hurt, and that might lead to a carcass that was injured or not intact, and so of less value to the people selling it. So the manifest aim of this technology is the safety and also expediency, getting things done faster. But the operative function is that it does block this physical contact and struggle and this visceral encounter between the animal and the human. And trapping can be contrasted to hunting, also to hunting as a technology for catching, shall we say, an animal. So even when we're trapping wild animals, in the case of trapping wild animals, you have a technology that's designed with a specific type of animal in place and a specific type of hunter as well in place, versus people hunting their prey often have stories of hunting the same animal for days, or there are cases where the hunter will name their animal prey and build a kind of personal connection or relationship even to the prey. So trapping has also this element of, in a way, effacing the animal or de-individualizing it. Here, this is an excerpt from an EC regulation handbook. So the eyes of the people stunning the animal are guided to a point to shoot or reshoot, in this case, on the right, not the face of the other. I know we're going a bit over time soon. So an interesting element here in the use of these technologies is how they modify these moments of or encounters that involve killing the animal. So in private slaughter, in the case where the farmer might have been the same person who is also the person slaughtering the animal, one might say, following the eye, that there is a kind of contract between the animal and the farmer. So the farmer takes care of the animal, protects it from the elements, feeds it, and in exchange, the animal provides the farmer with its flesh. In industrialized slaughtering, the killing is done by somebody who has no prior knowledge or connection or encounter with the animal. So people working there comment that, I tell people I'm a hired killer. Slaughterers will say jokingly, or I'm paid to kill. And this is a moment that for Levinas, Levinas talks about murder. So he says the alterity that is expressed in the face provides the unique matter possible for total negation. I can wish to kill only an existent, absolutely independent, which exceeds my power infinitely, and therefore does not oppose them, but paralyzes the very power of power. The other is the sole being I can wish to kill. So according to Levinas, you cannot wish to kill. You can kill, but you cannot wish to kill anything other than the other. So intensified slaughter in this framework would become a problem, because killing these faceless animals is something nobody can wish to do. So, and yet we do kill them and allow them to be killed. So people who don't want to kill these animals, don't wish to kill them, kill animals who do not want to die. For people, consumers who do not want to hurt anyone, here I'm kind of an asterisk to this meat paradox. We can talk about that, but who want to eat a lot of meat cheaply. And last example of technology of effacement are these identification tools. I'll give you the example of the EU Trade Control and Export System, which tracks location and movements of the EU livestock. The animals are issued unique IDs, numbers on birth, and these are used as barcodes on their ear tags or also as numbers in their passports. And all this information is stored in digital registries that are talking to each other across countries. Now, this type of technology, again, will individuate the animal at the same time as typifying it. So numbers will be unique, but will be all numbers. They will pinpoint individuals, but individuals as part of a type, as part of a sequence of numbers, right? They will script encounters away from facing the other, the animal as an other, and towards counting or measuring it as part of, as a token of a type, you know. So what I've noticed, I noticed this in the animal lab, and I notice it here as well. In the animal lab, you know, there's this tendency, I would say, to add faces. So at the same time as technology is used to block facing these animals as unique beings, at the same time, we have faces added. So often a loss of animal or human face gets supplemented by imagery or equipment that adds face to it. In the animal lab, there were, for example, posters of these wild snow bunnies or relatives of the animals that we were experimenting with in the lab, and this idealized, you know, free wild animal on the wall of the institution. I was, I think, operating as this added face. Here I have some stills from a video communicating how traces work, and we see, you know, the video identifies Chuck, this cute little cow, baby cow that's being bottle fed. I don't know what that means. He gets an individual passport, and we see his journey going to meet Anna, this other cow in the Netherlands, and you see like heart bubbles emerge, and Anna has this like cute little bow, and in every picture some animal is smiling. So we have this addition of a face or a personality or of individuality to the animal. Another image from the Norwegian milk provider Tine. So it says, maybe the words best milk on its way to you. And we see here the names of the animals, Turid, Tussi, Otina. Turid, Tussi, Otina, I imagine. So, you know, the idea, oh no, you know, this truck is not just carrying, you know, produce or faceless produce. It's coming from Tussi and Tina and Turid. Okay, so, okay. Oh my God, I'm really over time. I'm sorry. What do you
Sophia,
think? Is
don't
it
worry,
okay?
don't worry, move on. I mean, we'll have time. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's
Okay, so I apologize. I'll try and wrap it up. So then, does effacement really matter? So I've talked about these technologies, but does it really matter? In some ways, aren't we already de-animalizing food or these products that we come in contact with, for example, through language? So we don't say animal flesh, we say meat. We don't say cow flesh or muscle, we say beef, pork, milk, egg whites, etc. We already avoid referring to chickens, ovums, right? Or, you know, baby cow food. So these intermediary concepts of animal products are one might say, are really kind of doing this work that I'm saying technologies of effacement are doing. But I would say that this technology, this type of technology, amplifies the distance that's already instituted through language, and also, I guess, through our practices of how we transform meat, animals into meat, or into edible, the animal to edible, as Viala's title of her book is. So how they do that by blocking encounters and also blocking pauses and blocking this type of hesitation that Levinas would call ethics. So they make for routine, they speed up this routine, and they make more and more animals and humans, the humans working with these animals, disappear, and more products appear faster, closer, and more cheaply for us. So now for this kind of next stages of the argument. So I defined original ignorance as being more at home with the derivatives of often industrial or technical processes whose original sources become strange. And here I can, of course, we can have the example of loving bacon, but being quite unfamiliar with pigs. But I have encountered this in different situations as well. For example, I was in the Huntington Library in California, Pasadena, and suddenly I was walking around and I smelled the smell of the soap that I used to have as a child. And it was this very familiar smell. And I looked down, and it was that Huntington Library is very famous, the garden, because they have such a variety of plants. So I looked down and I saw this very strange plant. And it was this instance of what I would call original ignorance, that I would have been much more familiar with the soap than with a flower like that. So so in the case of meat, we're talking about knowing and loving bacon versus pigs. And this is what I would say gets amplified through technologies of effacement. And how could this be twisted, or what could be the opening here? Lindsay McGoy talks about how ambiguity, when it's deliberate, and also ignorance, how they can act as a rebuke, as a kind of fighting back to oppressive or inadequate classificatory systems. So she gives the example of Eve Sedgwick. If you know her work, she's a feminist epistemologist, and she talks about how Sedgwick refused to call herself heterosexual or homosexual. She didn't use these categories, and she didn't do that because she felt she wanted to challenge the classification itself and how adequately it might capture one's sexual life. So by extension, we might say that these concepts, these intermediary concepts, such as meat, or such as sausage or burger, they hold the kind of ambiguity that can be amplified through effacement, but at the same time, they can be used to rebuke or to fight a classification of this product as, or an assumption that these products are and will be and should be animal-based. So in some ways, I was imagining it a bit like this, that we have, you know, a lot of cows dying on the left, like a lot of cows that have to get killed, a lot of them fast in a very efficient way to make burgers come around for us and be so familiar and so close to us and tasty, etc., that we fall in love with them, right? And we want to use them in our traditional dishes. And that actually we come to care about burgers more than cows. That leaves this opening for the super cow of Beyond Meat, you know, or all these companies to come in and become the burger, become the burger, and in a way kind of save the cow. So this kind of idea of meat without meat, of cows getting transfigured into burgers as ending up, ironically, saving cows in the end. So that was how I wanted to come to this conclusion of that the intensification of the meat industry is ironically facilitating the end of meat. And I'm going to leave you with a list again of these technologies. I said that this happens through technologies of effacement, built architecture environments, entry and exit rules, special garments, animal handling protocols, and naming and identification techniques that can all operate to block human animal and encounters and facing. Effacement feeds into original ignorance, which can be emancipatory. Now it's facing a solution. I would say it's not a recipe, of course, because I mean, also Levinas never meant to give a recipe. So one might say his ethics is more descriptive than normative. But what I see it offering is this space and this emphasis on pausing and affect and this ability to respond, perhaps, following somebody like Haraway's thinking here. So yes, I want to leave you with this image from the illustrator of the European Commission's guidebook. I don't know if the illustrator did it on purpose or not, but the cow is facing us in this image while being stunned. Okay, thank you very much. Arve Hansen and Karalike invited this contribution to their forthcoming volume, so I just wanted to make a reference to that. And these are my references. You can have the slides as well for further scrutiny. And yeah, thank you very much, Stathi and everyone, for your attention. Maybe you want to have a break. I don't know how tired you are.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophia, for such a provocative talk. That was really excellent,
Oh,
and
thanks.
something very new, and as I said, a very thought-provoking approach. We'll have time for questions, at least 20 minutes for questions and comments. So the floor is to the audience and to the attendees. Please feel free to activate your camera and address the question to Sophia, or write to the chat, and we can get it from there, and Sophia can respond.
Thank you.
To permit the audience to prepare
Yeah.
the questions or to reflect a little bit, I have one question to start. In those technologies of effacement that you are really very, let's say, nicely develop the argument, where medicine and science from the medical side and dietary patterns and dietary recipes and also dietary scientific results does this has any place in effacing meat, or what? How you can see the role of this kind of scientific data and practices in the conceptualization of meat?
Thanks. Yeah, Stathi, I haven't thought of that. So far I've limited myself to looking at the situations where the human and the animal really physically come face to face, or could come face to face, or body to body, or encounter each other. Certainly I would say that of course, a lot of the literature on, as you said, the medical and medical science or dietary science, nutritional science, by already viewing the animal as meat or as food, right? Addressing or dealing with the animal as food. They are technically facing the animal, right? So in that sense, I think you are right to flag that. Same time, I'm not sure how that would how that would play out, whether it's if I compare it to these concepts, like I said before, these intermediary concepts like pork or beef, like these concepts that put this distance between the animal, the living animal, and what we have in the plate. I wonder whether that might be more similar to the work of what sort of the medical science and nutrition science and dietary practices are doing. But yeah, it's a good question. I have to think about it. But I think the concept is more interesting, at least this concept of the face is more interesting when we have the animal and the human in encounter, I would say, in a more like embodied way. I'm still not sure whether the animal has to be alive in that encounter. Because, for example, the ways of cutting meat or presenting meat in the supermarket might allow for encountering the animal as like closer to the living animal versus not. There was this, but yeah, maybe I don't have to talk about that. But yeah, this a scandal I was thinking when a whole piglet was frozen in the freezer and was sold, like a little piglet in the freezer in Norway, and there was this like uproar on Twitter and like, how can they be selling this? And it was very interesting because of course we sell pig all the time, but it was the fact that this piglet was intact in its body that made this encounter more problematic, or as I would guess moving in that sense. But yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. And we have some questions. I don't know if you have access to the chat, otherwise I will um, start prioritize.
I'm not sure. Actually, yes, I do have access to the chat. Should I read the chat myself? Or what do you think?
Um, I can read it and you can respond then. Let's start with the first one, but I don't know if... Okay, here. Okay, now I have access. Adonis Koukuladakis. No, this is no. Let me
I can see
see
one.
the questions. Okay.
Stavrula. I
Would
see
you,
Stavrula.
yes, Stavrula Anastasaki, would you propose stopping eat meat?
Yeah.
Just a moment.
I can read it, Stathi?
Okay, yes, because
Would you propose something to eat meat, or would you propose a different treatment of animals in small farms, where we would still not avoid slaughtering? I guess this account in a way, what I would propose, and this type of account would propose can be different, but so this argument in a way wants to reinstall this possibility of facing or having this possibility of pausing again, when encountering the other and making this kind of moral decision that I'm going to kill you now. I want to kill you now. I want to eat you now, for example, or not. And for Levinas, in a way, facing need not mean that you're going to be nice to somebody. You might, for him, it's like the other is the only thing one might wish to kill, to murder, because they exceed your powers. So it's like, I'm thinking of this like passionate, like love affair here, which is like, I'm gonna kill you because I can't control you. It's horrible, but that's the image that I'm getting here with this Levinasian murder impulse. But so this kind of account would say make it possible for this type of encounter to exist. Whether it's, and I think something that I think is an interesting example here, account, is from a Sami indigenous. So the Sami are an indigenous people in Scandinavia. They live in north and middle of Norway and Sweden and Finland. And there's this story that I thought was very interesting of a Sami hunter. And this is related by his daughter. And he comes back after hunting, and he hasn't got an animal with him, hasn't killed an animal. And his daughter asked what happened, and he said that, oh, I met this rabbit, but and the rabbit looked at me, and I saw in the rabbit's eyes that this animal just wanted friendship. So I didn't kill it. So having this kind of individual relationship with each animal would be, I guess, what the account would propose as a way to be ethical or morally accountable here. So in that sense, one might expect, might not be the case, of course, but one might expect that in a smaller farm where the farmer is familiar with the animals or has a kind of relationship to them, would be a better alternative than the intensified slaughter production of meat, because it would allow for that pause. But perhaps not, because it depends. I think it would depend on the situation. So,
There is another question by Marilena Bellu. I was wondering how much is it the policymakers' fault, the excessive consumption of animal products? Should there be regulations, for example, that help in some way consuming the alternative products instead of animal ones?
Thank you, Marilena. That's a very good question, and thank you for flagging it. And definitely, the consumption of animal products is not a simple matter. It's not. I think your group and your work might be better situated to teach me about how this happens, how meatification happens in a way, how our diets become meatified or have become meatified in the last 50 years, especially. So it's a complex situation, and I think it is this interplay between definitely technology making it possible to produce this meat faster and cheaply, etc., and more safely. So technology feeds into it, but policymakers and subsidies, of course, for farming and for different reasons, for food security, for political reasons. The nations have different policies once it comes to how they subsidize farming in local farming. So that's definitely part of the story here as well. And then also the symbolic meaning of meat, right? Meat is something that used to be so precious and a symbol of status, a symbol of affluence, power. There's so much work also done on gender and meat, and this kind of idea of that meat signifies virility and power and masculinity in some cultures, and also in the Western culture. Also up the status of meat, right, or meat consumption in our society. So I would say definitely there are material and economic reasons at the same time as cultural sort of reasons for this reality. So should there be regulations that help in some ways? This is discussed. Yeah, I mean, people are discussing different ways of taxing, for example, these products, and also this notion of true cost accounting, of actually making the price of a product reflect its climate impact or hoofprint in this case, or instead of footprint. So that could be an option for sure.
There's a question by Tracy. Tracy, do you want to address the question or I should read it?
You can read it. Go ahead. I've got some background noise.
Okay, cool. Do you think the acceptability of realistic meat alternatives is higher than plant-based diets that haven't or don't need to travel the real meat effacement, fake meat evolution described in Meat We Don't Greet?
Okay.
You can ask me if that's not clear to you. I'm thinking of the process of that you described very thoroughly in the article versus like the, maybe decades or centuries old sort of just straight to plant-based philosophy that doesn't have to go through the process of removing animals from the equation.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I'm trying to understand the acceptability concept here.
Acceptability by users, by consumers, if you want to anchor it. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think so my work on this is more from this philosophical perspective, I would say, than actually having done research with people. In our project now, we have just conducted a survey on meat replacements and seeing, I would say, hopefully after that survey is analyzed, we might have some idea of like what you're referring to, this acceptability of these different products. And there are also, in vitro meat products. So cultured meat might have a different uptake compared to these sort of biotech or lab, heavy meats like impossible meat, or also impossible foods, and as you know, they are also quite sophisticated technologically, like also Beyond Meat, and plant-based, more traditional alternatives, like, I don't know, the falafel or the revitho keftes here, or what, these dishes that we have in different cultures or cooking practices that can operate in that sense. So I'm not sure. My answer to you is like, I don't know. But in some ways, I expect that the market that these meat replacements are targeting are the meat eaters and meat lovers, versus the plant-based alternatives that are clearly, sort of marked as such, are perhaps hoping to tap onto the vegetarian market and expand that. So it might be that they're kind of working towards the same aim, but from different directions. I don't know if you saw, I can't remember the name of it, but from the ad, you see how much this product wants to imitate or to be like meat. So you see, for example, the sizzle on the pan, or this evocation of the smell that's going to have. And I would say that these realistic, alternatives are targeting the meat eaters, meat lovers market.
It's something like a vape to a cigarette, right? It's trying to replace the whatever cognitive or addictive aspect of meat fat. And I don't know. I mean, I won't go into it, but you don't about in your article the way that they create the heme, right? That they actually managed to create this thing that tastes like blood, and
Right.
that's what makes it so real.
Yes.
It's really fascinating.
Yes. Yes, and that's very interesting. There was a tweet, I don't know by, or no, it was an Instagram post, but a woman, Stordalen is her name. She's the director of the EAT Foundation, Gunhild Stordalen. She's Norwegian, and she made this argument in a way that, much like a nicotine patch is a bit bad for you because it still has nicotine in it, these meat replacements are also a bit bad because they are processed and they will have fat and they will have elements that one is, probably would consider less than fully healthful. But they would be acting as what you said, a kind of like lesser evil, shall we say, or lesser bad. Certainly for the planet, it would be quite different. But if we think of health, human health, that's one of the also the hesitations of people who are plant-based towards these meat alternatives that are heavily kind of processed or lab designed. I can read the next one. Is the tendency to effacement something what we can move past through critical practice? I hope so. I hope so. It's critical practice and through critical practice and maybe through creating these situations for encounters and for connection. I think it's not necessarily a bad thing, probably, if I'm thinking more meta now, of course, because effacement, I mean, this, generalization, classification, categorization, these are things that science does standardly, right, with its objects. And science can lead to good things as well. So one might get benefits as an individual after. So, for example, a patient, right? A cancer patient, right? You are typified as such as a cancer patient, even though you are Sophia, but you get the benefits of others like you having been studied and having been researched on, and these medicines or treatments developed for you with others in mind. So of course, our our way of being and knowing in this world is to some extent dependent on generalizing and typifying. But effacing, I would say, is this ethical moment in these processes that we would call epistemological moments or epistemological processes. And it's important. It's important even when we do it as scientists. For example, when we're working with human subjects or when we're working with animals, how to do that. That was what my research with the lab animal practitioners showed, that actually a lot of these practitioners were having trouble emotionally, ethically doing the experiments they were doing with the animals. So they were not, they were uncomfortable or some of them had nightmares, or some of them had problems eating meat after that. And it's of course very taboo to discuss that type of issue as an animal researcher, but it shows you that these encounters happen in the lab. And with any one of us or have done research with people, right, you see how you can connect to people, you can empathize, you become moved or not moved or angry, or right. So this facing and generalizing and how we manage the ethics of our research, of our work, I think is very important. There's no solution, right? It's like, I guess it's the sort of feminist theory of like staying with the trouble, right? Or what Haraway calls staying with the trouble. It's kind of, I would say, to some extent unavoidable, but yeah. Sorry, I see. I hope that was an answer, although it was quite long.
We have two raised hands, one by
Yes.
Antonis Koukoulakis and the other by Mailin Liu. So let's start with Adonis. I think that Adonis was first and then Mailin. Adonis, please.
Thank
Can you hear me? Is it
Yes.
good? No background noise and stuff.
No, it's
Right. So, well, I found it a very interesting presentation, and I really like the paper. My question is the way I understand the thing that came to my mind as I was reading the paper was that this reminds me a lot of what happened during the Holocaust, and the industrial animal industrial meat production has been compared to it. I don't know if you've heard about PETA and many other organizations that have spoken about this. And the way I see it is that during the Holocaust, what we had was essentially all these technological advancements became utilized to construct an industry of death, basically. The reason why this was allowed to happen was that there was a pre-existing ideology that could situate specific subjects, specific groups of people into this death industry. Because as we know, like anti-Semitism and prejudice against Romani people and all that was something that had existed for centuries, if not, for centuries in Europe. So that's why these people were targeted and put into the concentration camps, and we all know what happened then. And I'm also reminded of Eichmann in Jerusalem, the book by Hannah Arendt, and what Eichmann was saying at one point. He said that he was loading children onto trucks to be transported to their eventual place of demise. And he was not shocked by this. He saw this as, if anything, he saw this as quite humane, if you can believe that, and that these children would die soon, rather than having to be to suffer through the system. And I'm wonder. So, and I think the same thing happens with animal. With the animal industry, in that we have this ideology that situates animals on a different sort of moral plane to us, and even though we have this amplification of distance through this industrial production of meat, I don't think that on one hand, this allows for different technologies, different types of meats and meat products to be conceived. Have plant meats and all that, or lab-grown meats. But I don't think that facing the animals would. I don't think that this, in combination with facing the animals, this new technology in combination with facing the animals, would necessarily lead to an emancipation of them. Because I think because I think the reason why this industry is allowed to exist in the first place is that there is this different categorization, this different way of conceiving our world, in that we are us, and there's this other category of beings, the animals, which is a very this is a Western concept. There are other cultures we know that have a different conception. They have a different sort of categorizing. So I don't think that these new developments, combined with seeing the animals and interacting with them, are enough to emancipate them. Because, in my opinion, like emancipation of animals would mean, I think this is a very strong word to use, but the way that I understand it is that emancipation of animals means no meat industry at all. No, not even small scale animal husbandry. So yeah, that's so. I don't know what your thoughts are on this. Like, how do you think we could overcome this this predicament in which we're in? How are we to emancipate them in the end if there exists this ideological construction in our culture? So yeah, that's my question.
It's a good question, and I think I guess it's a little different from what the paper was doing, because I'm not actually talking about facing the animals at all, in a way. The argument is more based around effacing the animal. So, and how effacing the animal allows, so that's the paradox, like how effacing the animal is facilitating, changing, replacing in a way the animal. So, so if we were to face, and I saw another question here in the chat that I think kind of connects a little bit to what you asked too, Adoni. From Ioannis Batas, or I think his question is also kind of relevant here. But we can get to that next. But I agree with you that the issue, of course, is not necessarily. So the argument here was, okay, in a way, tricking people, right? It's like you provide to them this burger, so they're still meat lovers, right? They still have this ideology that I can eat you. I'm fine eating, the other, right? And I don't care, in a way, don't care who you are. I've never met you, and I have no interest in that. And that it's based on this type of ignorance that I would say some of these replacements might become more effective or successful by approximating, in a way, these products of animal bodies. But I agree with you that facing the animal, indeed, I have several friends and colleagues in Norway, because Norway is one of the countries where there is a lot of this small-scale farming, and our partners, as I mentioned, right, the cow that I showed you was from one of our partners, a small organic farm. And yeah, and they feel less bad about eating these animals, because there's this assurance or presumption that they have a better life than animals who are raised in an industrial farm. So it's in a way correct what you're saying, that in a way facing the animal or encountering the animal need not lead to not eating the animal. And the root of that ideology is like deep. I would say maybe I was thinking about an idea in Lindsay McGoy, and she's I forget who she's quoting, but she talks about, in a way, equality. We cannot just say, right? We cannot say that humans and animals are equal, or deserve something, equal treatment. But in a way, we can perform it, or it's not sufficient to say it, but it's important to enacted or to create these situations where we do meet them or recognize them as equal. And I would say in that sense, encounters or facilitating encounters between humans and animals might be important in how we orient ourselves ideologically. So I would hope that, well, in a way, it need not help, but it could.
It could
I
help.
don't know if that answers your claim, but
Yeah, because the way I see it right now is, on one hand, the amplification of the distance has allowed for the new animal products, which is great to have as an option. But this will end up, but I think given the ideological framework, this will end up just being another option. So it's just another option, and the meat consumption will continue, so there is no sort of emancipation there.
Sorry, Adonis, can you repeat that? Because I just got caught, my attention got caught in the chat.
Yes, exactly. That happened to me as well before. Like you have the amplification of the distance because of the industrial meat production, right? And that allows for the new products, plant-based meats, and all that. That's great to have these options, but given our ideology, I think this might just end up being just another option without having any necessarily any emancipatory consequences for the animals. Some people will prefer that, just like people have so far preferred vegan-based diets that do not include these products, because these are recent developments. So I think there needs to be a fundamental change in how we conceive the animals in the first place before we can talk about emancipating them. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think the way I used emancipatory in this paper was, in a way, it's more aspirational, right? That it will be freeing, but emancipatory in a kind of limited sense, that the concept of meat becomes free of the animal. It's not necessarily that the animal becomes free, but that the concept of meat becomes loose somehow from the animal. In that sense, the ambiguity or the effacement can help to free up that concept from the animal body. So it's a bit more metaphorical, I would say, than literal in this case. But I definitely get your point that, I mean, yes, it's also a philosophical argument, right? It's also like this kind of mind exercise to some extent here that I'm proposing, or a way of seeing a situation.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
That was great. I see so many other questions. Yeah, what do we do?
We are moving to one last question, I would suggest, because we are already very close to 2 hours, so we need to move on. And let's take the last question by Maylin Liu. Maylin?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I'd like just to ask from an experiential standpoint that like we see all these plant-based meat products and they do kind of satisfy our curiosity or like of this new kind of concept of meat, and also maybe somebody would consume for the purpose of animal production, animal protection purposes, but it wouldn't necessarily kind of stop a consumer from searching for real meat, kind of real meat experience. And like if we kind of looking at the trends of current like meat consumption, we see this trend of going for organic meat, which somebody would go to a farm having this contact with animal, and then they would select a chicken when they see a chicken, they wouldn't see it as a kind of like a deeper relationship bonding experience, but rather as a kind of delicious experience which they can escape from this current industrialized concept of meat. And so in a sense that like having this facing kind of contact with animal would not really necessarily reduce the desire for meat. And like also like kind of from my experience or like my opinion is that to reduce this intensification of meat consumption, maybe if somebody would face a industrialized confined chicken, maybe somebody would be more like feeling sick in terms of their traditional meat consumption, and maybe that could be a, I don't know, like an effective solution to reduce this massive consumption by knowing the origin of their meat.
Yes, thank you, Madeline. Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, there was some research done. I can share it with Stathis. Now I can't remember then. I know one of the authors. I remember her name, but I don't remember the first author. But it was a psychological study that also looked into gender differences in meat consumption and found that well, they found in this study that also male respondents, specifically when shown the connection between the animal and the meat, were some of them more eager to eat the meat compared to women. So it might be also gender differences here in these attitudes, or like how one yeah, but I mean, I was now in very recently with one of the artists in our project in an animal farm with a pig, and with some pigs in them, and they were not, confined. It was a smaller farm, and I remember walking out with Mel, and she was like, don't you just want some bacon right now? Or, yo, I was looking at that pig and then imagining the bacon, and I was like, that would have never occurred to me. But she had this reaction to being close to the animal, right? So it's what you're saying before, this in a way, seeing these animals being treated well might absolve you of any guilt you might have had, imagining them being, industrially confined and suffering. So they might become, more appetizing. But in that case, of course, the scale of the production would be smaller. So that's the thing that, of course, I would love to answer all your questions, everyone. So I copied them. So I will see if I can answer them after today. But yeah, so in some ways, this, of course, the hoof print of animal production, were it to be smaller scale, etc., would be different, environmentally speaking, and it would be, of course, better for the animals on some level. They would still be healthy animals being killed for their meat, and that's as Adonis said, that's not especially emancipating, but yeah. I tend to be thinking more in terms of, okay, moving slowly towards something that might be better, as opposed to, I mean, of course, perhaps at some point, eating other animals will be considered horrific and crime of these generations, but so far it's yeah, it's very stubborn practices and ideologies that we're raised in, all of us. So it's not so easy.
Okay, Sophia,
Yeah.
we can pass you all the questions by the students and our colleagues. I can, let's say, get them and pass them to you. I think that we should move on.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you so much for such a provocative talk. I really enjoyed it, and
Thank you,
and
Stathis.
also the conversation really showed the interest that you triggered. That was fantastic. On a rather sad note, I should say that all these technologies of effacement, I think that they make also animals soundless, so we don't hear the sound of the animals. And why I'm saying so, that it is because today we hear the very sad news of one of the very, very best sociologists of science and technology, the important scholar, Trevor Pines, died. So, and it is really a very sad message that I should convey. Trevor was a huge scholar and a hugely important scholar in STS and one of the founding fathers of STS, along with Harry Collins and Donald Mackenzie and Stephen Sapin and David Blair. So on this sad, let's say, a note, let's dedicate this fantastic, very, very nice talk to him.
I would love that, Stathis. Thank you so much. I had no idea. And I worked a bit, well, not with him, but with one of my very good colleagues at Cornell, and I were planning to work together. And so, okay, yeah, definitely should go to Trevor.
Yes. Sophia, thank you so much. That was a fantastic talk. That was really the heart of, or the center of CONEF's, our project's approach, and there are a lot of things to discuss, and we know that well already. And we also we have started a collaboration, and we will continue. And there is an option of going and do some observations and fieldwork in a slaughterhouse here in Greece. So more to come in relation of CONEF and mitigation. Thank you so much. That was fantastic, and
Thank you so much.
I wish you the best for the Christmas break. I would like to thank you all, and for those who, because we are continuing to our to another class, Sophia, the law, science, and technology, with some of the students. So for those that they want to join us, please. I accept my wishes for very best Christmas and a very best holiday break. Thank you, Sophia. We will be in
Thank you,
contact.
everyone, for being and sticking it out for 2 hours. I'm so impressed with you, and thank you so much. It's such an honor.
That was
Also,
that is
this talk with
fantastic,
you.
Sophia.
I look
We
forward
are
to
really
more.
grateful. Bye
Okay,
bye.
everyone,
Thank
enjoy the
you.
rest
Bye.
of the
Fantastic.
class.
Bye.
Take care.